Welcome to Enroute, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of Enroute seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The Enroute podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. Welcome to this episode of Enroute. I'm Joseph Brigandi. Today we're being given the opportunity to get inside the mind of a man who's been inside many criminal minds. He's the chief hostage negotiator for the Lubbock Police Department. He's the author of multiple books including Fight or Flight, Negotiating Crisis on the Front Line, When Every Word Counts, An Insider's View of Crisis Negotiations, and he's a co-author of Crisis Negotiations, Managing Critical Incidents and Hostage Situations in Law Enforcement and Corrections, which is currently in its 6th edition. He's been providing crisis counseling for police departments for over 20 years. He was a co-responder long before co-responder programs had been invented. He's a pioneer in the area of integrated mental health services in first responder and public safety organizations. He's a mentor, a friend, and has a great sense of humor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andy Young to this episode of Enroute. Dr. Andy Young, welcome to this edition of Enroute. Good to have you on the show, sir.
So good to see you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. For our viewers who don't have the privilege of knowing the body of work you've produced and your background, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
I am a recently retired college professor. I taught psychology and counseling at a local university for 26 years. And for the last 23 years or so, I've been associated with law enforcement agencies in my area, with the Lubbock Police Department primarily, but also the Lubbock County Sheriff's Office and our state troopers in this region, Texas Rangers Region 5, mostly on their hostage negotiating teams, but also wearing a few other hats like critical incident stress management, and what a lot of people refer to as a co-responder model, having mental health professionals attached to a police department.
Okay. How on earth did you break into that line of work? It is now starting to be a thing, but you've been doing this a long time.
Yes, I was in the right place at the right time, if you will. I was minding my own business, and the chief of police secretary heard that I was working on my graduate degree in counseling. And the chief of police at that time, according to her, was very tired of sending his officers to the same domestic dispute call repeatedly, where there was no arrestable offense, nothing really for law enforcement to do. And so the chief of police secretary advised the chief, hey, you might want to get some people who know this stuff a little bit better out on patrol, and maybe they can do with these calls what law enforcement can't. And she asked me if I'd like to be part of this pilot program, and I had no idea what I was getting into, but said yes anyway.
Yeah. Nice. Now that pilot program has grown. I have ridden with your unit, and you guys are active. And how many members of the unit do you have, and how do they work and interface with your patrol division?
So I have about 25 mental health professionals. They all have a day job, but they also give some of their time to our program at the police department. We call our unit the Victim Services Crisis Team. And from those 25 people, I ask them once a month to give me a 8 or 10 hour shift. So we're on duty Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. and we start at 6 p.m. and end at 2 a.m., but then we're also on call the rest of the time. And so when my people show up, they've been trained to drive a city car, work a police radio, interface with the patrol division, and respond to calls at the request of patrol officers. So anytime a patrol officer thinks a mental health professional might be helpful at their call, then they'll give us a holler and we'll go over and see what we can do, all in the, I guess, with the goal of stabilizing people in crisis, assisting people after very traumatic incidences, and hopefully helping police officers do their job all at the same time.
No, it definitely puts a good face on the city and on law enforcement when they're able to go ahead and bring in other collaborative partners and work through these crises. And I saw it firsthand when I visited your units. What are some of the challenges of establishing a unit like this and getting it up and running?
Well, the first challenge was just law enforcement making room for civilians being at their scenes and walking around their police department.
Yeah.
I think some officers had no idea that we'd be useful. I think a number of officers were worried about scene safety. Now I've got one more person to worry about and watch over their safety while everything else is going on. So there were some, I would say, some costs in their mind, maybe some liabilities in their mind, and they weren't really sure what the benefit would be. But then with some time and experience, I think officers were able to decide for themselves whether or not this was going to be useful to them.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are certainly getting enough calls. When I've worked with your people and with other crisis response units, there's no shortage of requests for you guys to be out there in the field.
Yeah, that's right. During the patrol shifts, just like with any other unit, it can get quiet. But it's a good thing that we're on duty 24/7 because, as you know, it can hit at any time. The size of the need can, be from one person to, oh my goodness, a very large need. So I'm glad that I have so many people who have been willing to give their time and energy to this. And I guess just like law enforcement, sometimes it's a very quiet, in the background, and even thankless job. But then when people are needed and when we can serve some use at a scene, it does seem to make a difference.
What advice would you give to clinical mental health professionals that are wanting to pursue this line of work and to get into co-responder work with agencies?
Yeah, I think the first thing is getting training in crisis intervention and crisis response. Then you'll also want to get training in whatever agency you might be working with. For me, I had no or very little idea of what a law enforcement environment and job was like. And so I needed to get up to speed and educated on that quite quickly. And a lot of that was through experience and trial and error, and I would not recommend that. So getting educated and experience ahead of time might go a lot smoother. But to understand the people that you're working with, so in my case, understanding what law enforcement's job is, what it's not, how they work, how they're trained, their limitations, their frustrations. Once you understand that culture, that system, then maybe you're more likely to effectively bring your training background and experience into these crisis situations.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that we're always working with is to try to teach collaboration and teach reliance
Yeah.
on each other. But one of the things we've got to do is understand each other's culture. Um,
That's right. And if I come into a new culture not understanding it, but then trying to impose my background upon it, yeah, I should expect that won't go very well.
yeah, absolutely. When I was in counseling school myself, I'd come in it with a first responder background. And I was reaching a point, it seemed like every instructor I had was just beating culture, culture, culture. Every class there was 1 or 10 sections on culture. And I reached a point in my training, I'm like, would they please stop? And then I started laughing hysterically one day when it all hit me. If you can't solve a problem, it's because of the culture. You don't understand the culture well enough. If you can't help someone through an issue they're having in the treatment suite, it's going to go back to how they were raised, culture, background, things that they're bringing into this that are affecting their healing process or their decision-making process. And then I finally understood why they pushed that and why that understanding was so important.
Yeah, one of the things that was a part of my education was not only understanding the culture of the people whose lives I'm called into, but also understanding my culture, my biases, the lens through which I watch and understand the world. And I think that message was probably brought home as I tried to enter into this law enforcement world because it is so very different. And at least in my experience, a lot of people don't even believe that those things exist out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as clinicians are trying to go ahead and understand this world and step into it, one of the things I tell them is, you've got to go ahead and be prepared to put on some composite boots. You've got to be prepared to step out of a fire truck, step out of a rescue vehicle, step out of a police car,
Yeah.
and walk a mile in their shoes or in those boots, and that takes a little.
Well, and going back to your first question, I think one of the things that started to open the door is being right there with police officers as they do those jobs, seeing the same things that they're seeing, walking through the same scenes that they're walking through. And they're watching me to see how I react, just like I'm there to assist them with their reactions. And so when they see that you have some understanding and they see how you react and how you to cope, then maybe some doors start to open.
Absolutely. Respect is earned.
Yeah.
You also do more than the co-responder model. And you and I both share this background in critical incident stress debriefings, critical incident stress management. What advice do you have for people who want to understand and potentially do that line of work?
Well, it is a version of trauma counseling or trauma intervention, but it is right after the event. And so hopefully understanding acute stress disorder, understanding typical normal coping mechanisms, and in my world, in particular, gallows humor and how people cope through those mechanisms. That was a nice introduction, which now, I'm totally corrupted.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife knows when I've spent a little too much time in the firehouse or in the police station. It definitely comes out.
Yeah, that really went well in the college classroom too.
Ouch. Understood. But the rewards of doing successful critical incident stress debriefings, there are people that pick them apart. And I think that when they do, it's potentially a lack of understanding or they've had a poorly run one in the fire service when I've had the complaint. It's because somebody was voluntarily told or ordered, you're going to go to this class and you're going to go ahead and show up here and you're going to handle debriefing. And they struggle with that. I recognize that anybody can take the debriefing courses if you've got the first responder background, but I highly encourage having a clinician who understands group therapy and group dynamics go ahead and manage this function. What do you think about that?
Oh man, I don't think anyone outside of our profession knows that there's a whole body of training and literature and experience in group therapy and group dynamics. And so to bring that to a critical incident stress management debriefing is, man, I've seen it make a world of difference. And you're right about that being mandated and voluntold to go do it. That doesn't work well. If you don't have somebody who's trained and experienced in it, that doesn't work well. So I can see where the disagreements and beefs come from.
Yeah. I definitely couldn't agree more. But I know they work. I know they're highly effective if they're done with high fidelity and somebody who passionately wants to go ahead and be there. People don't understand post-traumatic stress, disassociation, and some of the things that good debriefings help us to work through and process. And I think that, taking great courses. The International Critical Incident Stress Foundation has some great courses on the subject to get it started. We at the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute pioneer our own courses, but we don't recreate the wheel. If there's good training out there, we want you to go ahead and have that and utilize it. And you go ahead and go even a step further, and you've entered a realm that many clinicians have never considered, and that is the world of hostage negotiations. And I know you teach it all over the country and perhaps all over the world. Tell us a little bit about what that's like to be a hostage negotiator, how you got into it, and what some of the challenges are you face getting accepted.
Well, the getting into it mirrored getting into the patrol work, the victim services work I got into. It was about maybe 6 months after doing the on-scene crisis counseling thing with officers. And I think we had probably done 1 or 2 critical incident stress management debriefings with officers. And one of the hostage negotiation team supervisors came to me and said, "Hey, we could probably use somebody like you on our SWAT callouts. How would you like to become a hostage negotiator?" And again, I just sounded great. I don't know what it is, but count me in. And again, oh man, I probably went to more than 2 calls for service without having been trained. And again, that is unwise. So eventually took a 40-hour basic school and did some of my own educating. And so learned on the fly again. And man, what is it like? Again, I think it mirrors the on-scene crisis counseling thing, but in a very specific, high intensity, multiple moving parts kind of realm. You have the tactical side, you have the incident command side, and then you have what negotiators are trying to accomplish. So all the elements are there just in a compressed space with more at stake. Everyone trying to bring resolution to something that probably does not, it doesn't look good at the onset. We're trying to stop something that's already in motion.
Yeah. And I got to admit, the way I stumbled upon you a few years ago was because of your lighthearted sense of humor. You don't take yourself very seriously. And, that's a sign of a healthy mind. And I watched a video segment that made me hysterically laugh about you and your vest. Tell us a little bit more about that, and we're going to cut away to go ahead and take a look at that in a moment. But how did that segment come to be?
Well, I guess it starts with I'm a nerd who has nerd friends. So getting into this work, especially the hostage negotiation work, exposed to the realm of SWAT and tactics, and like being part of this community, which also brings with it some gear like a vest and a helmet. And a nerd friend of mine was like, "You know what? We should put a little making fun of you video together, just to illustrate things." And so we just did it on a whim. I think we made this little video in about 30 minutes. I'm sure it took him a while to edit it, but yeah, we busted it right out because it just ensued. I love this work. I love all that comes with it, and I don't mind being a nerd about it.
I love it. It's hilarious, and we're going to go ahead and cut away and give it a look right now.
So I'm having this dream, right, where I'm a fire truck and I'm driving around the city and I know I have to put out this fire. The problem is the city is all made out of steel, so nothing's actually burning, and I'm driving around and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. Dr. Young?
Oh yes, proceed. So some of the symptoms that you want to focus on, repetitive behaviors, obsessive behaviors, focusing on wearing a particular item of clothing all the time. That's a good throw. There you go, nice one. I love you, Ella, and I'll do anything for you.
Can I please wear your vest?
No.
Andy, hilarious. I watch it often. It looks like it was a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, I'm glad I got my kids involved too.
There you go. Very memorable. Oh, my wife laughed so hysterically, especially with that last line. No.
Oh, man.
I love it. Now, your books are so helpful to those of us trying to go ahead and learn this profession and understand this culture. I might have one or two of them, or all right, maybe three. And we use all of them in our courses here at the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute, especially your crisis negotiations book. And that's something that unfortunately we don't get that training. I'm a paramedic instructor and as well as a clinician. And when I went through our paramedic manuals, looking for our behavioral health training, I realized a couple of things. There isn't any. Was the first thing I realized. Not one page about how you take care of yourself psychologically, and how we take care of the public in crisis. Maybe the paramedic manual contains 15 pages, and half of those pages are about physical restraint, how to tie someone up and not get hurt. And the other half are about chemical restraint, and that's it. So no de-escalation, no negotiations, no signs and symptoms of psychoses or how to work with somebody who is traumatized. And that's when I realized, okay, this is part of the problem, and this is why we need to offer more courses in this area. You also teach the 40-hour law enforcement mental health officer course, I believe, yes?
Yes, the state of Texas just recently changed that. We have the 40-hour CIT crisis intervention course now, and then it's a 24-hour mental health police officer course. Just trying to do the same thing for officers that you're talking about for the paramedics. How do we help people understand what they're getting into, be it someone in a psychiatric crisis or just somebody who is experiencing their own personal crisis? And what can we do besides handcuffs and chemical restraints, which usually require a lot more paperwork? And maybe there's this intermediate area where we can intervene just as people, using specific skills based on specific perspectives to try and to mitigate the crisis and maybe help somebody work their way through it as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think about 3 years ago, I had asked you if you would share that curriculum. And the moment I looked at it, I realized that a police officer who has gone through this process has got so much more training than the average paramedic on the street. So programs like this have to go ahead and grow, and we have to get more people trained and more people out there.
Yeah.
When I was reading,
totally agree. I love that you're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. In Fight or Flight, page 27, you talk about the naked man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It brings a lot of humor, but also I'm with you. When I read that paragraph, I felt very strongly, yeah, there's a sign of so much more going on here. That your index of suspicion for danger should go up in these instances. Tell us a little bit about that.
In my effort to get educated about this law enforcement world I was getting into, I just did some research, and one of the articles I read was about how police officers were getting very hurt and sometimes killed by these naked subject calls. You know, somebody is in an intersection and they're naked. And why is that call more dangerous than some of these other calls, like a domestic dispute? And the answer was actually pretty clear. Research indicated, well, that person is naked for a reason, which is either a psychiatric condition or a drug-induced condition, which in turn would make them unpredictable and sometimes very strong. And then just kind of the approach to those calls, everyone's like, oh, naked man, that sounds kind of silly. No, actually, that's very dangerous, unpredictable, and even lethal. And so just that little bit of research, trying to get my feet under me as I started this work, turned out to be very beneficial. And we actually proved it out on the street to be true. Not that we needed to, but man, it was amazing to watch some of that in person.
Yeah. Yeah, I resonated with that, paragraph very strongly. We tend to start laughing and put our guard down, and I'm like, no, we're entering a potentially very dangerous situation right here. Let's slow down and keep our wits about us and approach this very carefully and tactfully. Yeah.
That's right. It's very easy to want to rush in and do something when that may not be the best play.
Absolutely. Now, September is Suicide Prevention Month. And, I want to go ahead and get your thoughts on first responder suicidality. One of the things I'm sure you all know as well as I do is we're always out advocating. But our first responders often have, depending on which study you read, 5 or 10 times the suicide risk of the public. What are some of your thoughts on that?
As a private practice counselor and somebody who works with emergency services, I see a similar dynamic repeatedly, and that is things snowball, things build up, and I have no place for that pressure, that anxiety, that depression, those experiences. I got no place for them to go. I want to protect my family from the horrible things that I've seen. I don't want anyone to question my ability, so I'm a little hesitant to trust people with what I've seen and heard. And so there's no place for all that pressure to go. And over the course of a 10, 20, 30-year career, it becomes a bit much. And when you add to that a critical incident or an incident in which I feel like I could have done more, or maybe I had an accident or made a mistake, and maybe I'm dealing with guilt or, God forbid, even shame. Anyway, so many factors can lead to that snowball growing and growing to a place where I get overly depressed. I become very anxious and I don't know what to do, and I just want it to stop. And at least in my experience, that's kind of how we get there with thoughts of suicide and attempts to suicide. It's really just a way to try and stop the pain and find a way out of a situation I have no way out of. And so programs like yours, things that we're trying to do, just to give people another alternative, maybe a safe place where they can say things they don't feel like they can say anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other challenges I think we face, both of us and all of our colleagues working in a first responder environment, is educating the leadership. One of the things I hear over and over again is a sense of moral injury. And the Canadians have developed the term sanctuary trauma, But what I try to go ahead and teach and let leaders know is that post-traumatic stress caught in its earlier stages is highly treatable and people can return to work. But if the leadership, doesn't know how to handle this, doesn't know how to work through it, they're actually making things worse. What are your experiences and what messages do you have for our leaders?
Yeah, I think for leadership, just because you've been in this career for a number of years and you've been okay, and maybe you've experienced critical incidents yourself and you were able to make your way through it on your own, that doesn't mean that somebody else is having a harder time with something that you were able to navigate. And if you haven't been through those experiences, then I would encourage you to slow down about judging how other people should navigate those experiences. I guess it's, I got through it, so you should be able to get through it too. That mentality I have not found to be very helpful. But to kind of postpone judgment and just make room for, all right, well, even though this wouldn't affect me the same way as it is another person, maybe that's okay. Maybe people are different and people require different things.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think the role of adverse childhood experiences plays in some of this? It's just starting to get documented now.
Yeah, well, according to those documentations, It has everything to do with it. So I have experiences in my childhood and then a critical incident in my adulthood. There's that snowball again, and it grows and speeds up. The inertia is very hard to stop. And I think, at least in my experience, most people underestimate the impact of these 10 adverse childhood experiences. And I think they underestimate that in part because many of them are so common. And there it is again, just because it's common doesn't make it normal or okay or easy to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was saying, and I try to go ahead and teach, is caught in its earlier phases. Post-traumatic injury is highly treatable, highly recoverable, and return to work is expected. We have all sorts of policy and procedure. If a firefighter falls down a ladder and breaks their leg, if an officer is wounded in the line of duty, we got your back, and there's going to be physical therapy, occupational therapy. We're going to do what we can. A mental health injury, everybody seizes up and freezes up. And so one of our goals is to hopefully educate leaders to the fact that you can return to work.
Yeah, that reminds me of a personal experience I had after a hostage negotiation call out in which the subject died. I just ran into our chief of police at that time in the hall afterwards, and he did his best and called me into his office and sat down and asked me how I'm doing. And after such a sensory overload kind of event, that was the first time I could pause and think. And I looked inward, how am I doing? And I didn't really know. And so I told the chief, yeah, I don't really know how I'm doing. And he was caught off guard. He's like, well, you're supposed to know. You're the professional. I'm like, yeah, no, sir, I don't know yet. I need some time for my bell to stop ringing before I can answer your question. And he was like, well, when you find out, let me know. It's like, okay, I'll get back to you, sir.
Yeah. Absolutely. But you know what? At least he asked. He was caught off guard. That's one of the things I try to teach our first responders is you're not going to cause a suicide by asking a member if they're suicidal or they're struggling. You're going to help.
Yep. And just the fact that you're asked and then I get a chance to answer and someone listens to my answer, it's not rocket science. That's the beginning of deflating that balloon and that pressure.
Yeah. Tell me about peer support programs. We offer peer support program training, and I'm trying to get people to integrate clinically directed peer support to have clinicians that they routinely and regularly work with that they know ahead of time. But tell us a little bit about your experience. And one of the things I'm shocked when I go to conferences and I ask people how many of your agencies have an active peer support program? Less than 20-30% put their hands up.
Yeah. No, that's my experience as well. At our department, we've been doing the critical incident stress management thing for quite a while. And so it has not been a big leap to then also get officers trained in peer support to be there for the cumulative stress over a long period of time, to be available for things that don't always make people go, oh, we should do something, but may still be stressful to officers. So to me, the critical incident and the peer support models link up very well. And officers are, enthusiastic about getting that additional training because they see the need in their peers and in themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time I've rolled out programs, I find that they're very well received and people are happy to have them. One of the stigmas that starts to come into this is people think if I go to a debriefing, they're going to force me to talk. One of the very first things I do as I'm laying in my foundation is you don't have to say a word, you can pass. Your being here is support for your colleagues. Just simply being here lessens the burden of everyone. We encourage you to talk. And then all of a sudden people go, wait a minute, this isn't some forced exercise. Then they start to naturally open up and support their colleagues. And there's an awful lot of healing and growth that I see in these. And the model works. And it works better when it's voluntary and the instructors are highly engaging and extremely dedicated to doing this. Um, One of the other things you mentioned in your book, and I really enjoyed, is your love of Viktor Frankl and his work. People
Yeah.
don't remember that name now, unfortunately, unless you're into psychology. But tell us a little bit more about Viktor Frankl and other psychologists, psychiatrists, or clinical professionals who've influenced how you do what you do.
Sure. So, Viktor Frankl was a mental health professional, trained up, and at the onset of World War II, because he was Jewish, he ended up in a Nazi concentration camp and survived years of that experience, and then wrote about it. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, at least for me, connects with our topic that we were talking about earlier regarding suicide. That one of the things that keeps me going is that my life is meaningful. And conversely, how do I make meaning? How do I make sense of suffering and traumatic events? And because Viktor Frankl survived a Nazi concentration camp, at least for me, he's got a lot of street cred when it comes to commenting on how to make meaning of and how to make sense of suffering, moral injury, and difficult experiences. And so that work was very helpful to me as I got into this world of emergency services and a front row seat to a lot of suffering. And one of the things that has helped me personally as I go through that is to try and make sense of what is the purpose of suffering. And so Viktor Frankl has been a very inspirational reference point for me going into this work.
Yeah, I'm a very big fan and love his work as well, and have studied it. And one of the other things that I want to go ahead and touch on is self-care. Self-care is not selfish. Here you are on a half a dozen crisis response teams. Do you shut it all down and unplug for a time? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it can be as simple as watching Deadliest Catch and just observing how fishermen work in Alaska.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I have a cover band that I'm a part of, and so I'll play the drums. My kids are taking guitar lessons, so you know, being a part of that, trying to practice what I preach, talking with other individuals when I'm having a hard time. So this weird combination of finding things outside of this work, things that I enjoy and are meaningful outside of it, then also dealing with it as it comes up instead of letting it snowball and build up. Yeah, I'm still clunky at it, but it seems to be a combination of those things.
yeah, absolutely. So self-care is not selfish. You're into, I understand you're a very good drummer. I have people who've told me they've seen you play live.
Okay, well, I'll take it.
There you go. So 80s cover bands, what are some of your favorite musical influences? Who do you play?
Oh, well, as a drummer, we have to talk about Led Zeppelin and start with John Bonham.
Nice.
But my band, we play whatever pleases us and we think we'll get a reaction out of the audience. So it can be silly stuff, which again, I think goes to your earlier question. How do you cope with this thing? Got to keep it light. Got to keep the sense of humor going as much as possible. And so even playing songs that make us laugh has been part of our repertoire.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I tell people is you've got to unplug completely. I'll occasionally have a first responder in my treatment suite who starts to try to answer the phone or keeps the radio on. And I'm like, shit, it needs to shut down. I have a half a dozen crisis response teams now that I work with, and I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. I go see a movie. The crisis is still going to be there in 90 minutes when I come out of the theater.
Yeah, for me, having other people trained up so everything runs smoothly when I'm not there, that has made a big difference for me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And let's talk about that for just a moment. If you have a passion for this work, if you're trying to go ahead and help out an agency, how How do you start a crisis response team? I know when I asked you that question several years ago, you said, come on up and visit Lubbock, and I did, and I learned so much. And, it has helped me to establish a team in 2 fire departments and a police department that are actively working. But, how do you go ahead and set up a crisis response team? What are some of the recommendations you can give for clinicians trying to do that?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is no need to reinvent the wheel. Reach out to other departments that may be doing this. I'm happy to share our SOPs, so you have at least some sort of guidelines, some guardrails, some things to consider. But for me, another piece of it is doing the ride-alongs, getting the experience. So though I may not be part of a team yet, I'm at least gaining exposure to the culture and the thing that I intend to get into. So some sort of additional training and experience without reinventing the wheel seems to set people up for some success here.
Very nice. I'm glad you mentioned the ride-alongs. We demand it. If someone wants to come on with our teams, I insist, ride out with Dallas, ride out with some of the local teams and fire and police departments, and, get your feet wet. And that right there, they'll go, you want me to do what?
Yeah, right. That tells you something.
It really does. Or they're like, okay, I'm glad to do this. And then we start the training. I also advise them to get a hold of courses at the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, to look at us, the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute, and the award-winning faculty that we have put together. We use your books in our crisis negotiations courses. We mention you often. You have been a great resource to me over the years. You've never failed to return a phone call, never failed to share SOPs, thoughts, and ideas. And, on a personal and professional level, I want to thank you for making yourself available to me. And I know other departments will as well, but you've got to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm trying to do this. You guys are doing it successfully. Can I come check you out? But thank you for that. And as we wrap up, tell me any last thoughts that you have for either our first responders who are out there or clinicians trying to serve them, or, what last words do you have for us?
Yeah, I guess my mind returns to Viktor Frankl and doing a job where we don't get thanked a lot. I guess that brings to mind assisting with death notifications. No one's going to thank you after doing a death notification. And so we have to find ways to derive meaning and satisfaction from a difficult and thankless job. And so I encourage people to look for that, to look for the meaning in these experiences, and knowing that just the fact that I was there trying to do my best for somebody on their worst day, that means something. And that is something that we should hold on to and not let the darkness overwhelm us when it seems to be thankless and suffering and difficult. It does mean something. It is worthwhile, even if no one sees it and no one knows it.
Absolutely. And thoughts on finding a clinician. I know when my clients come to find me, they will often have gone through 3 to 6 clinicians before they lock in. What are some of your thoughts on that if you're a first responder struggling?
Well, I guess I would go to the agency and encourage the agency to do their due diligence. At the Lubbock Police Department, we have a wellness committee, and we've gone out into the field and interviewed and vetted and looked for not just resumes, but recommendations on clinicians who will be first responder friendly, who have done some homework, who have some experience. Doing that vetting ahead of time is very important. And I guess some people think that all clinicians are trained the same, and that your statistic bears out is not the case. So we've got to do some homework ahead of time.
Absolutely. A lot easier to find resources before a crisis than when you're in the middle of it.
Precisely.
All right. Dr. Andy Young, thank you so much for being gracious enough to share your time with us. And thank you for being on this episode of Enroute.
It's my pleasure. So good to see you, and I've enjoyed chatting with you too, Joe.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Brigandi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enroute. Enroute is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to FRBHI.